Hello and welcome back to the channel. This one is particularly for those of you who are trying to decide between a zoom lens or a prime lens. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a better idea about what will work best for you. Let's kick it off. First of all, thank you to all the new subscribers to the channel. It is great to have you here. It really means a lot to me, so thank you very much for joining us. And if you haven't, then click the subscribe button below. Okay, so this is to do with a video that I created a couple of months ago. It was talking about the best first lens to buy. And I mentioned this lens in particular, and this is a 24-105 f4 zoom lens. This particular example is Canon's version for the RF mount. It's a fantastic lens. Those of you who have it will know that it's very sharp, it's got weather sealing, but do check out the full video. I'm going to put the link, I'm going to try and put up here. So in that video I talked about the advantages of getting this zoom lens for when you're starting out. And I really kind of meant it for those who are starting their own business when it comes to doing video photography. And if you're running a business and you could only afford one lens or wanted one lens to start off with, I recommended that because a lot of professional photographers and videographers have that in their bag and they'll expand their collection from that, or they will always have it as a backup. So people who might have an 85 f1.2 prime might still have this lens just in case. And there's some really famous photographers out there who swear by this lens and use it in place of primes in some situations. Now, this video did attract a comment from Camera Prepper, and I do appreciate the comment. And he talks about how when he teaches people photography, he will instruct them to get a prime lens. And I absolutely agree with a lot of what he had to say. So let's explore that in more detail. So if you are just starting out and you really want to get better photos and you want to improve your ability to compose and to frame shots, then a prime is absolutely the first lens that you should get. And the reason for this is restriction breeds creativity. When I'm teaching students one-on-one or training clients to do better photos or video, and I want them to improve their composition and framing, I will say, stick a prime lens on your camera and shoot like that for as long as possible, because that limitation of that one focal length is going to breed creativity. It's going to force you to think outside the box. What you might find if you just use a zoom is you'll just zoom in and out and end up getting the exact same framing for every single photo. Whereas if you're using a prime lens, because of the fixed focal length, you're going to have to get creative. You're going to have to try different things. You can't just do the same framing. This kind of approach is going to train your brain to think differently about composition, about how you frame the shots, and force you to try different approaches. So if you are brand new to photography and you just want to get better, then you should choose a prime lens that is going to be a kind of an all-rounder. I say this because if you were to start with a 100mm macro lens, yeah, you're going to be able to get some macro shots, but also it's such a tight frame with everything. It'll be great for portraits, it'll be great for close-up macro, great for landscapes as well. But there's going to be occasions when you're going to need something a bit wider, and you might feel restricted when you're looking for a wider shot. So for example here, I'm shooting at around about 28mm. I'm using a zoom because it's more convenient. But when you want a shot that is this kind of wide, 100mm macro isn't going to cut it. My camera would have to be way over there, and it would be very difficult for me to see my monitor and know what was going on without plugging in an HDMI and all that mess. So it's a lot more convenient for me to have a 28mm focal length for this kind of shot. And when you use a 35mm, a 28mm, or a 50mm, it gives you the opportunities to get portraits, to get landscapes, to get wide-angle shots, nice street shots as well. It gives you more flexibility and more options. So having a tighter focal length, like 85mm plus, you're going to feel a lot more restricted. And yes, restriction is going to train your brain to get better compositioning, better photos, but that's really quite hardcore stuff. I would say get a 28, a 35 or 50 and work from there, because you're going to feel a lot more flexibility and have a lot more freedom with those focal lengths. Plus, those lenses tend to be a lot cheaper. In particular, the 50mm is easier for camera manufacturers or lens manufacturers to produce, and it's easier for them to get a wide aperture with that focal length, so they end up being much cheaper. And when you're first starting out, choose cheaper gear, because when you get a better idea about the kind of photography or video you're going to be doing, it's a lot easier to then invest in more expensive lenses that are more appropriate. For example, my first ever lens when I first started out was a 50mm 1.4. It was a fantastic lens to start off with. It was perfect for portraits because you could get a really nice shallow depth of field, and it was ideal for low light events work, which is what I was kind of doing when I first started out.
Many months later.
However, it ended up staying in my bag quite a lot of the time because I found that the 50mm wasn't my kind of deal. I didn't really like the focal length that much. I much prefer a 35mm lens, and that is why I always have a 35 in my bag. A 35mm lens is also more expensive than a 50, so again, go with the one that's cheaper to start off with and get to grips with it. And I think that time I spent with the 50mm lens was invaluable because it showed me my own restrictions and it taught me how to be a bit more creative with my framing.
Wake up, wake up. I can't hear anything. Okay, this is your wake-up call.
I've waffled on a bit, so I'm going to try and get back on track. What are the advantages of a prime lens over a zoom lens? First of all, they are much smaller, or they tend to be much smaller. This means they are much more, well, much easier to carry around, and especially to carry around a few of them. It's also much lighter, so you're more dynamic. It's easier on your back, it's easier on your arms, smaller and lighter primes. Another difference, and it's kind of hard to show here, primes have wider apertures, and this means they let in more light. The wider your aperture goes, the more light you let in. Therefore, it's better for low light photography or video. The aperture also affects the depth of field of your shot. So if you want to have a shallow depth of field and more bokeh behind, more out of focus backgrounds, primes tend to be best for this because you can get 1.2 primes, 1.4, you can get some that are even 0.95. Those are heavy and expensive. I wouldn't recommend those, especially if you're starting out. A 1.8 or a 1.4 is a great starting point. It gives you nice shallow depth of field, nice bright shots. It's a good starting point. Primes will also give you better quality at a lower price point. There are some zoom lenses out there that are amazing in low light because they have a very wide aperture all the way through the zoom. They also handle color fringing really well. However, they're expensive, very expensive. For the same quality of shot, or even better quality image, a prime would cost you a fraction of the price. So you don't need to spend a lot of money on a prime to get incredible image quality. So while you do get some primes that are very expensive, like the 1.2s and the Nocts, if you start off with a cheap prime, you're going to get outstanding image quality compared to a zoom, especially a kit zoom. Does this mean that zooms are rubbish? No. If the zoom lens came with your camera, like a kit lens for example, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean that it's bad. All that it means is that you might need to be a bit more disciplined if you're going to train yourself to be better when it comes to composition and framing. What I mean by this is, just because you don't have a 35mm lens does not mean that you can't restrict yourself to only shooting in 35mm, or 50 if you prefer to try that. What you need to do is be very disciplined with your lens and don't change the zoom. Stick it to the focal length that you want to practice or that you want to use only, and then don't change it. Some lenses have this thing called lens creep where they will actually just drop if they're facing the ground like that. So bear that in mind and keep putting it back to the focal length that you want to be practicing in. This means that you will still be restricting yourself to a single focal length, and you're going to have to work with your legs moving in and out. You're going to have to change your angles to get that variation in shots. So it's not the end of the world if you don't have a prime or don't have the budget to get a prime. If you're stuck with a zoom lens, that is fine. You just need to be a bit more disciplined and stick to the focal length that you want to practice. What's quite handy with some zooms is they have locks on them and it stops you from changing it. So if you're less disciplined, that might be a useful feature for you. What are you going to be missing out with by just having a zoom and not a prime? Well, you're going to have smaller apertures, like this is an f4. That's a big difference between an f4 and an f1.8 when it comes to light gathering, but also depth of field. They're heavier and more cumbersome, and like I said earlier, more expensive. Well, more expensive to get a higher quality image. But there are definitely some advantages to zooms, faster to use and more convenient. This is because you have all of that focal range without having to change lenses. If you've ever done a shoot with just primes, you are constantly changing lenses to get different shots, unless you're shooting on 2 cameras, which a lot of wedding photographers have to do to make sure they don't miss a shot while changing lenses. There have been times I've been changing my lens and looking at something and going, oh, I really could have got that shot. That would have been great. So having a zoom in that scenario would have been better. And later on, I actually changed to having one camera that always had a zoom on it, and then another camera that had a specific prime on it. This meant I had the best of both worlds, and if I needed to change the prime for a different one, the zoom was there still ready to get any shot that I needed. It was a good backup for all scenarios. I talk about bang for buck when it comes to the image quality of primes, but when it comes to convenience, the bang for buck of zooms, yeah, it can't be matched by primes. It is way more convenient. Now, I talked about how primes are smaller and lighter, and therefore you can carry more of them around. However, if you want to have the focal ranges, say 24 to 85 covered, or thereabouts, it might be more convenient and lighter and smaller to have a single zoom that covers that focal range, rather than having 3 separate lenses. So again, you're having to change between those lenses. Them all in your bag might be a bit heavier than that one lens, so that's something to bear in mind. Is a single zoom going to be lighter and more convenient than all 3 primes? And will you have time to change between them? Which leads me on to another benefit of having a zoom lens, and that is you've got a huge focal range in one lens, and that is very, very helpful. Saves time, gives you plenty of options. If you're not worrying about improving the quality of your photography because you're on a client shoot and you need to just get all the shots the client needs, practice in your own time, improve your photography in your own time, not on your client's time. You should already be at a standard the client requires if you're challenging them for a shoot. Use your own personal time to put a prime on your camera and go and practice and improve your photography. Somebody in a comment told me to improve my photography, like it was an insult. I'm like, yeah, I'm always trying to improve my photography, and so should you. It's a good thing. Look, even if you're a seasoned pro, you should still be trying to improve your photography. Go out, get a prime lens, be free and enjoy some photography. Go and do some street, go and do some landscape, something that you don't normally do for your clients, and just enjoy photography again. Often that's a lot easier with just a prime. And that brings me back to the reason why, in the end, I do prefer prime lenses to zoom lenses, and that is the pleasure of photography that comes with just using a prime. There's something really liberating about having just a small lens with one focal length, kind of not holding you back, but setting you free. There is something liberating about it. So if you have the budget to have a prime as well as the zoom that you use for the majority of your work or the majority of the filming or photos that you do, I would recommend just getting one and putting it on your camera when you want to just relax and enjoy the process. It looks less obtrusive if you're photographing people in street photography, for example, and there's just something about shooting on a prime. It's very relaxing. It's quite nice. So primes, arguably more pleasurable to use, smaller, lighter, wider apertures, more shallow depth of field, more light let in, so better for low light photography or video, better image quality at the price point, or zooms. They're more convenient, much more convenient, and you're less likely to miss a shot while changing lenses as you are with a prime. So you've got to think about what are your priorities when it comes to photography or video right now, if you're looking to get either a first lens or a new lens. And here's things for you to consider. Is this for work? Is it for client work, or is it for work for your own business or for your own channel? What is the purpose? Because this is going to be the main deciding factor of whether you get a prime or a zoom. Because if it's for client work or for your own business, convenience might be the most important factor. Or if you're often shooting in low light, then maybe a prime is the better option because it lets in more light than a zoom. What type of photography or video are you going to be doing? If you're doing pieces to camera like this, where you don't need to really change focal lengths, and letting in a lot more light and having a shallower depth of field is more important, then maybe a prime again is a better example or a better option. If you're looking for a more cinematic look, the bokeh and shallow depth of field of a prime is unmatched. If you're looking to do YouTube videos, then I would say also go with a prime because, again, piece to camera like this, you want nice shallow depth of field, let in more light because often the places that we film YouTube videos, we don't always have a nice big light over here. So you might need that kind of boost to start off as well. Plus, if you're doing B-roll, get it looking nice and cinematic with a wide aperture prime lens. If you're simply looking to improve your photography and you're not getting paid for it, or you're building up to potentially doing professional work or doing your own business promotion with your camera, then again, a prime is a good way to learn photography, to learn better framing and better composition. That restriction and that limitation of that one focal length really does help improve your framing and composition. But a lot of this is going to come down to what is your budget, because if you have a limited budget and you need it to stretch as far as possible, then a cheap zoom lens might be a better option. And if you can only afford one lens, then again, the zoom might give you more options and more flexibility. And then you can always invest more into a prime later. Whereas if you buy a prime lens for the same price, you might be struggling with certain shots or certain jobs or certain kind of photos that you're trying to capture. So budget is always going to play a part in your decision. So keep that in mind, that sometimes you might get more value out of a zoom than you would out of a prime. But lenses are always a better investment than cameras because lenses you tend to keep hold of. You can always upgrade your camera system to get better photos or video quality, but if you find some good quality lenses, you might keep those for the rest of your career because a good lens is a good lens, and as long as it attaches to your camera in any means possible with adapters or natively or whatever, you can always hang on to those and you can always keep them for that one time you might need them. They are a good investment. And sometimes lenses increase in value. Whether you want to sell them is another matter, but your camera will always drop in value. I stick by what I said in the other video. If you are doing client work or professional work, a zoom lens is going to make sure that you are prepared for anything that's thrown at you, whether it's bad weather, a fussy client that has so many different requirements. You're going to be better served by a zoom. But this is entirely down to you. And if you need any guidance, please do put a comment below. Let me know the reason that you're looking to buy either a zoom lens or a prime lens, and maybe I can help out and give you a bit more insight to do with your specific situation. Put a comment below and I'll get back to you. If you disagree with anything I've said here as well, also put a comment below because I like to have those discussions as well. And I'm always happy to learn from other people's experience and, improve my own knowledge. And if you like more content like this, then please do check out some other videos. I'm going to link one here that you might find interesting, and I shall see you in the next one. Take care.